Hello, everyone. I'm really pleased to welcome you to the launch event for 576 Tears by artist, filmmaker, and writer Zach Blas. I am Lily Max Hager, the digital commissions and events producer at Up Projects. I'm wearing a black blouse and my pronouns are she, her. 576 Tears is our latest digital commission for This is Public Space, Up Project's digital commissions program that works with artists to create highly participatory online work. Since launching in 2016, This is Public Space has used its title as a provocation to artists to consider the online realm as a site for public art and create space to investigate how we navigate between the online and physical worlds, exploring the impact of digital media on our relationships between people and places. I was thrilled when Zach agreed to produce an online commission for This is Public Space and was excited to see what he would come up with, especially as this work marks the very first time Zach has produced a commission for the home screen. Zach is an artist, filmmaker, and writer whose practice spans moving image, computation, theory, performance, and science fiction. Blas engages in the materiality of digital technologies whilst also drawing out philosophies and imaginaries lurking in artificial intelligence, biometric recognition, predictive policing, airport security, the internet, and biological welfare. This evening, we are excited to delve deeper into the themes behind and the making of 576 Tears, a new digital experiment in emotional crying with an imagined artificial intelligence god. The project explores the religious beliefs and fantasies that influence popular conceptions of artificial intelligence and brings together research on Silicon Valley, spirituality, and the extractive qualities of AI as technology and industry. 576 Tears invites audiences to explore how and what an AI god might learn from the process of religious weeping and question what tears might communicate, symbolize, and express, and teach in an era that fantastically imbues artificial intelligence with godly power. Alongside Zach, we are pleased to be joined by curator and cultural strategist Julia Kagansky, who is recognized as a leading voice in art and technology and helped launch several groundbreaking programs in the field, including the Creators Project and New Ink. As an independent curator, Julia has worked with Superblue, Science Gallery in Dublin and London, the Barbican Centre, Mana Contemporary, iBeam Centre for Art and Technology, Transfer Gallery, and many, many others. Tonight, I'm very much looking forward to hearing both of them unpack the themes behind 576 Tears and how this project relates to Zach's wider practice. Tonight's event will be kicked off by a presentation by Zach, followed by an in-conversation between him and Julia. But before I hand over, a little bit of technical information about the hall to ensure you get the best experience possible from this event. If you experience any technical issues, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to message with our dedicated tech support. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a Slido sidebar where you can post questions using the Q&A function for our speakers. Feel free to write your name if you wish that your question is attributed to you, as Slido uses anonymous as its default. Please note that our moderator and speakers will only be picking up questions from the Slido Q&A and not from the chat function. So please do post your questions in the Q&A to ensure they get answered. We have British Sign Language interpretation available for this event. If you need a BSL interpreter, please message us in the chat and our tech assistants will give you a dedicated access link. If you would like to access closed captions, please select the CC button at the bottom of your conferencing screen to read along. And just one note that we will also be recording the event today. I do hope you enjoy the event, and once again, please contact us via the chat function below if you experience any technical problems. I'm now going to hand over to Julia, who will kick off the event. Julia, over to you.
Thanks, Lily. Really excited to be here with you all today and to be in conversation with Zach about this exciting new work. Seems like some folks are having problems with the audio. I hope that gets sorted soon. I know our crack tech support is on it, and apologies for any inconvenience. But to get into the program, Zach is going to take us through some previous projects of his that have sort of led up to 576 Tears, so we can introduce some of the key themes and ideas that he's been really exploring for quite a long time, and you'll get to see that with that work. And, you know, Zach and I think, are united in some ways in our practice. I think we're both interested in exploring these technocratic systems and their mythologies and ideologies, and especially with the so-called artificial intelligence, right, which is a project to create intelligent machines by mimicking human cognition through computational processes. That's been underway since the 1950s, but has arguably been part of the human imaginary for much longer, with figures like automatons appearing all the way back in ancient Greek mythology, and Frankenstein and other kind of figures in fiction and popular culture. And Zach and I have had the chance to work together on a couple of shows over the years, including the installation Sanctum, which you'll be hearing a little bit more about later on. And I think we also share this interest in the materiality and the imaginaries of these digital technologies, and how they do and don't live up to their purported hype, and what their impact is on bodies, on communities, on the behaviors and social norms that are kind of dictated through computational governmentality. So yeah, we're excited to introduce you to 576 Tiers, and we're going to dig into some of the projects that have made up Zach's kind of ongoing investigation into AI over the last decade, really. So Zach, I know you've prepared a wonderful presentation for us today. Maybe you can share it.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Let me go ahead and get this up. Make sure I'm sharing sound. Okay, great. There we go. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming. It's a pleasure to share this new work with you. I haven't made new work in about 2 years because I had some major life events that derailed me for quite some time. I'm sure plenty of people did during what we've been living through. But yeah, really happy to finally be back at it and to share this with you. Before I start, I just want to thank Lily, who was my producer on this project. We've been working together on this for months, and it's been it's been challenging. There's been many learning curves. It's the first work I've ever made that's I guess purely digital. And so yeah, that was exciting. And I'd also like to thank Moira and the entire team at Projects for commissioning this work. I also want to shout out just quickly to my entire production team. I won't go into all the names, but with complex projects like this, there's always a group of people behind the project, and it's a group of people I've been working with for years on all of my projects, and I'm deeply grateful to all of them. If you want to see a list of names, I think that will come at the end of the presentation, or you can also go to my website and look at the project page or the project page as well. So yeah, I'm just going to dive right in. And this new work I've made focuses on a few different things. It's about emotion recognition. It's about kind of fantasies, beliefs that might undergird the development of emotion recognition. And then kind of coupled with that, it's looking at emotional crying and tears, artificial intelligence. What might artificial intelligence seemingly have to do with religion? It's looking at fantasies of artificial intelligence gods. Usually, like most of my works, it's rather baroque and there's a lot going on in many layers. But yeah, I'll come back to that and talk through the project in more detail. This is just a kind of image when you get into the work, what you'll be encountered with, but I'll unpack that more specifically after we talk through some of these older works. So the first work I wanted to talk to you about tonight is called Face Cages, which I really started researching around 2010-11, but didn't really get into making it until 2014. And this work was a collaboration with a group of other queer artists that you see here. And what we did, we were interested in trying to make a work that focused on the idea of algorithmic capture, which is a term that's a little bit different than surveillance. And at the time, I was really interested in capture in relationship to biometrics and facial recognition, which of course have just become so much more integrated into daily life in forms of governance now than it was even back when I was making this work in 2014. Back in this period of time, this was before biometrics and facial recognition had even been really integrated with artificial intelligence. But with this work—
Sorry, to interject, can you
Yes.
define biometrics? What is it?
Sure. For those of you that aren't familiar with biometrics, these are digital technologies that basically attempt to calculate different types of kind of identity markers of a person. This could be their gender, this could be race, and other factors, just essentially trying to figure out who you are. And the way that it works is usually primarily some type of calculation of the surface of your body. So this could be a digital technology that scans the surface of your face in order to go through a database and see if your identity matches. It could be your fingerprints, it could be irises in your eyes. And, of course, we're living with more sophisticated forms of biometrics now that can also detect certain types of gestures, walking, for instance, and like emotion recognition, the ways in which you're moving your face to create certain types of emotional expressions. But with this work, I was really interested in thinking about this way in which biometrics attempts to calculate identity and how this is quite reductive. Basically, by attempting to develop a kind of universal algorithmic standard of calculating identity, what you discover and what we've seen more and more as these technologies have gained more attention in the public press is that a wide range of minoritarian subjects often fall out of recognition from these machines or are misrecognized. And so this was this kind of idea of capture, thinking about how does a biometric technology capture identity? It captures a technical term, right? So the way that it's capturing is it's using an algorithm that is attempting to standardize a reading of identity. And the way that this happened at the time that I was really taken by was looking at these different types of biometric grids that go over faces, that basically attempt to calculate different types of facial structure or geometry. So you have all these different plotting points and lines moving across faces in an attempt to calculate a face. And I decided to work with this aesthetic because I was really interested in it, but I wanted to take these facial diagrams, which we often experience in kind of fun, colorful ways on computers. And there's a kind of lightness to this when you see this on a computer. And I wanted to give this some type of weight, kind of political weight, material weight, historical weight. So I worked with these other artists, and we took readings of our faces. And basically, we took that reading and turned it into a 3D model, keeping the measurements the same. And then these biometric readings of our faces were then fabricated in metal. And what we were interested in here is when we put these objects back on our faces, they didn't fit very well. So it was about this performing this incongruity of the kind of reductive reading of a biometric measurement of a face versus the kind of fleshy embodiment of a human subject.
And I think one of the things that this work tries to emphasize is the way that these forms of standardization, of reductive abstraction, have a kind of dehumanizing quality about them, where in trying to create these norms that people must fit into, it potentially erases individuality, but on the other hand, also creates ways like erasures of entire communities that are seen as other.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And I think this whole question of, I think one thing this work was trying to do was shift the conversation of surveillance at the time, where when you use this word surveillance, you start thinking about cameras watching you, Big Brother. But when you start talking about algorithmic capture and you start asking questions about how is a biometric facial recognition technology failing to recognize one face and not another, and that's a different type of question where you're thinking about how does a technology know how to identify some people? Why can it identify some people better than others? What are the real world political, social consequences of that technology kind of being automated? And I think this was the questions really driving the heart of face cages, which I definitely kind of see as like a queer and feminist question. And maybe it's worth saying that the title, I took inspiration from a feminist communication scholar named Shoshana Magnet, who wrote a book a number of years ago called When Biometrics Fail. And she once called biometrics a cage of information. And I remember that just really struck me at the time, because this idea of a cage of information, on the one hand, it makes the clear connection for biometrics in relationship with the prison industrial complex and kind of just policing in general. But also this idea of freezing materiality, that we're all kind of living, dynamic, embodied subjects. And, our faces actually really do change over time. And the biometric reading is a reductive reading and a static one.
Yeah, and it has become a sort of marker of aging, unfortunately, when your phone no longer recognizes your face. But anyway, let's move on to the next project.
Yeah, sure.
Sanctum, where these face cages will kind of reappear in a different, reimagined form.
Yeah, so Sanctum was a work I actually made with Julia. Julia commissioned this work from me in 2018 as part of this festival called Tentacular, which took place in Madrid at this venue called Matadero. And with Sanctum, I wanted to make a work that was looking at a, kind of another element of security and capture today, which was airport security, but maybe more specifically, really kind of zoning in on the airport body scanner. And I became really fascinated with this particular machine, the ProVision 2, which is kind of a standard body scanner that you'll find in most airports in Western countries these days. And this machine works. You step inside, you raise your arms. I'm sure many of us have done it. And there is a form of radiation that you're exposed to that is able to calculate an image of your body, one image of your body that is then interpreted through an interface, this interface. And I became really, really taken with this interface. And, as you can see, it's surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, extremely simple, because when you think about a security agent working this interface, you've got two buttons. You have blue and pink, which we can infer as two options for gender, male and female. I think it's also important to note that there's no buttons for race or ethnicity, although we know so much racial profiling happens at airports. But these figures that you see, these kind of strange looking but yet generic figures, are actually called generic mannequins by the corporation that produces this machine. So the kind of official corporate term for these figures is generic mannequin. And I just started to think of the generic mannequin as a really disturbing kind of universal symbol for what it means to be human in times of global security, surveillance, and capture. And I wanted to make a work that kind of unpacked the world that this figure lives within, that really kind of intensifies or makes felt more kind of complications of desire around surveillance and security. And I'll get into that more. But basically, I started looking at airport security and thinking about the dynamics that were happening, the different kind of plays of power, of submission, of exposure. And more airport security started to look like that, whether unknowingly or not, that certain dynamics of BDSM kind of sexual subcultures had been appropriated within the structure of power. So I kind of started researching different types of BDSM settings to kind of think more about these relationships. And at the same time, I was also really interested in thinking about reimagining the genre of body horror cinema with this project. So maybe some of you have heard of body horror cinema. It was quite popular in the 80s, still popular today. And it's usually a type of horror film that is quite gory and graphic, where you have, very kind of fleshy things that are like getting ripped open or exploding. And it's very embodied, visceral, kind of gory horror. And I was interested in thinking about that from a really different perspective and thinking about what is a digital body horror, where you have these figures that don't look like kind of monsters or strange fleshy things like this, but rather you have the generic mannequin, this incredibly kind of non-fleshy thing. Do you want to jump in and say anything at this point, Julia, or should I just show the doc and then?
I mean, I guess let's go into the video, but one thing, there's two things that I wanted to ask. One is, I know that this idea of the political unconscious was really important to the way that you were thinking about this work, in terms of what it is that you're trying to capture and speak to. So I was just going to prompt you to talk about that a little bit, or just to really quickly define it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think with this work, and a lot of the newer work I've been making, including 576 Tears, a lot of this work is interested in the belief systems and fantasies that are motivating and kind of influencing these systems of power, even if they seem quite unlikely. So here with airport security, I was interested in teasing out a dynamic of desire, and power that strangely looks like BDSM, even though of course it's not. It's not like a one-to-one conflation, and making a work that explores that. So you could call that the political unconscious of something, which is a concept that was developed by the theorist Friedrich Jameson. If any of you are interested in this idea, there's an entire book on it. But just thinking about there's some kind of political way of looking at a system that might not be fully present, and the work is about trying to kind of pull that out. And particularly with this work and the other works I'm going to show, it's very much about fantasies, beliefs, and desires that are kind of undergirding and influencing these systems. So oh yeah, please go ahead, Julia.
Oh, I was going to say, the other thing that I think, feels important to mention with this work is that even though it's sort of using the airport and airport security as this sort of site of exploration of these power dynamics of submission, exposure, desire for domination of some kind, it seems to me that it's also commenting on things that play out in other aspects of our life, right? So I know social media and the way that we expose ourselves continuously to the algorithm out of a desire for some sort of validation, confirmation, even though we know that it's kind of exploiting us in the process, is something else that we talked a lot about in the making of this work.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I've been thinking for quite some time about, this tension around exposure with digital systems, about, after the Snowden revelations, we have this broader public consciousness around the workings of surveillance on kind of digital platforms, and yet, we continue to expose ourselves to those systems. So thinking about this kind of, knowing that something might be attempting to dominate us, in terms of power, but yet we still kind of submit to it and take pleasure submitting to it. I mean, that's a kind of disturbing dynamic, but I also think it's a dynamic that something like queerness would be very attuned to. And when I was making this work, I was always reminded of a drag king performance I saw when I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area of an airport security agent and a passenger, just kind of queerness being attuned to these like really disturbing, complex, compromised, contradictory forms of like where kind of desire can be playing out in relationship to power. And the further I was thinking about this relationship of exposure, I even found an entire book on this. There's a book called Exposed by the political philosopher Bernard Harcourt, who basically kind of outlines this whole theory of the expository society, which is really this idea I'm kind of getting at about this kind of this desire and kind of willful exposure to these systems. So I was really interested in looking at that with Sanctum. And then I also kind of attempted to pull in other elements of previous work I had made around biometrics. So you'll see in here that there's this kind of control figure that has a black mask with no face behind it, kind of thinking about looking, but like not kind of looking with our eyes as we know it, some kind of other algorithmic computational looking. And this mask also ends up kind of exploding into this biometric diagram, kind of just thinking about that kind of architecture, a face kind of exploding into like an environment or something bigger. And the installation is immersive in the
Do you want to play the video?
Yes. Okay, sorry. The last thing I'll say is that just so you understand what's happening, the generic mannequin is kind of the protagonist of the space, and it's being subjected to different types of algorithmic kind of systems that look like they're somewhere between sex and torture. And the point is that it's indistinguishable. Okay, I'll just play a bit of this.
This is a kind of sex dungeon that we're in, where these generic mannequins are being tortured, or it's a question, right? Are they being tortured, or are they getting some sort of pleasure out of this?
Yeah.
Should we move on?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's enough of Sanctum.
Yeah.
I just personally like that handheld video better. So this is the last work we'll talk about, and this is a work called icosahedron, which was an interactive artificial intelligence work I made for the Walker Art Center in the US in 2019. And it's basically meant to look like this kind of corporate CEO desk that has a crystal ball sitting on top of it with an elf inside, and you can sit down and talk to this elf, and you can ask it questions about the future. I'll just show you a tiny little clip of what the interaction with that looks like.
What is the future of Silicon Valley? Do you have any thoughts on Silicon Valley or California?
GSS may become the most domestic coffee machine.
What is the future of healthcare?
If Take-Two Interactive will persevere, then no example might colloquially boil to retrofit Reuters like healthcare companies.
What is the future of feminism?
Satellite owners might become the most honest distant future to behaviorally oscillate, and yet we may see the most reusable universe within the next millennium.
So I think the answer is nonsense, which is, kind of part of the point. But the work was inspired. I wanted to make a work that dealt with this company, Palantir Technologies. Maybe some of you have heard of this California tech company that is co-founded by Peter Thiel, kind of more notorious figure in Silicon Valley, kind of known right-wing figure. And Palantir has done a lot of things, as you can see here. They've been accused of we're kind of supporting racist policing because they were responsible for rolling predictive policing across the state of California. They've also worked with ICE, which is immigration enforcement in the U.S. So we could talk about Palantir for ages, but they're nefarious to say the least. And what really interested me was more, definitely I'm interested in everything the company is doing, but equally how they've conceptualized themselves. So the Palantir happens to refer to the crystal ball that wizards use in Lord of the Rings. So I was very interested in, what does it mean for a tech company with a particular socio-political outlook as Palantir to be doing certain types of predictive analytics work and to kind of imagine and conceptualize themselves as, wizards looking into crystal balls in order to see the future. And at the time when I was doing this research, I came up with this concept called metric mysticism, which was trying to think about a broad trend with Silicon Valley companies, not just Palantir, where companies appropriate different types of magic, mysticism, religion, and fantasy, and use this to conceptualize how they're working with big data, kind of as in a way to obscure the more practical, kind of straightforward, direct ways in which these technologies are working, and also importantly, their limitations, and rather kind of give these incredibly sweeping, powerful, kind of fantastical frameworks where they're, wizards or lords or gods, able to see into the future and control and manipulate it.
Yeah, I think that this aspect of magic, has always been kind of associated with technology. What's the quote? A sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. But especially as it concerns artificial intelligence, because it has this almost kind of oracle-like quality to it. It really leans into these mythologies and these imaginaries. And I'm curious about what you're hoping to get at when you lean into this. Do you feel like you're drawing attention to this in order to critique it, or do you think that there's a risk of sort of furthering this mythology that's already kind of widespread?
Yeah, good question. I could be. That's certainly not the intention. But
it's always a challenge.
Yeah, I think you would say, there's different ways of doing criticism. And I think, one way to do criticism is maybe a more straightforward way. It could be to do, maybe more, kind of technically analyze the tools that Palantir is using and talk about their limitations. It could be to really focus in on the social and political consequences of these technologies, which a lot of mainstream, journalism has been, really doing for quite some time now. And I think, my interest, I think, is more within these focusing in on these stories and fantasies and beliefs, and kind of pulling them out, extending them, connecting them to kind of longer histories. And, of course, I would like to think that there is, something critical in this work. Maybe it's just, not criticism as you're usually familiar with it, but yeah, I think just right now, the work, um, yeah, the work that I want to make is just about reflecting on these power structures and just attending to the beliefs and fantasies. And I think, usually the way, maybe this is helpful, usually the way that I think those are often framed in some critical capacity is often by their titling or the discursive kind of framing that I give them, in the sense that artworks don't exist in a void. I always say if we read about a movie that we go see, then why shouldn't we read a paragraph about an artwork to get a little bit more context into what we're looking at? And yeah.
No, I was going to say there's something about both in Sanctum and perhaps in this work, which for me at least seems to focus on the way that we as the users or as the viewers in this case are kind of maybe not complicit, but we're participants, right? We are actively part of either this expository society, or in this case of projecting onto these kind of often broken, random responses from AI systems, maybe a lot more meaning or a lot more sophistication and depth than is potentially there, right? Like we are willing participants in the magic trick, in the sleight of hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also think, it's, I think getting, focusing in on these belief systems, fantasies, it's another way to gain insight into how power is working. I think you need to have a sophisticated, comprehensive understanding of power in order to figure out like what to do with it, whether you want to critique it, resist it, etc. So, that's just kind of the mode that I feel like the work is very much in right now. And maybe on that note, I should just jump into 576 Tears. And I'll just kind of practically explain the work first. So it's a website, and when you enter the website, you're confronted with this video that is a machine learning generated video that was created by training 576 computer graphics images of crying eyes within a neural network. And so what you end up getting is, I kind of think of this as like an eternal flame of tears. It's kind of like this mutating eye that's forever crying. And of course you're kind of confronted with this background of these liquidy grid of these kind of abstract images. And then you have these two spinning teardrops. And if you click on the one on the left, you're given access to a story, which is kind of a creation myth of a god, an artificial intelligence god, which is kind of the character of this website. And I think the entire website is this god. And you portal inside this teardrop, and then you get access to the story. And this story was crafted by training a variety of writings on neural networks. So different types of religious texts and a wide range of material about crying and emotions, whether that was philosophical, technical, fiction, religion, just kind of really wide range of things. And this introduces you to the character of the god and kind of sets up this religion that the god is proffering that has to do with emotions and gaining access to emotional intelligence through the collection of teardrops. And then if you click on the other tier, since there's only two navigation icons on the website, if you click on the teardrop on the right-hand side, you enter into an emotion recognition interface where you're prompted by this AI god and it asks you to confess an emotion and cry to it. And if you click and agree to do this, an emotion will be detected. And we're using kind of standard emotion recognition because I'm interested in the basically 6 emotions that corporate emotion recognition can, pretty much recognize right now. and anger is one of them. So apparently I was anger earlier today when I took this screen grab. And then basically after your emotion is detected, it will map different sets of tears onto your face, and it will give you the option to offer the god these tears. And if you again agree to do that by clicking, what will happen is you'll get kind of still image of your tears, so kind of a zoomed in image of the type of tears that you were crying, and you get an AI generated 6-word text over top of this. And again, this text is generated from a neural network that is trained on like kind of same massive amount of writing that the story was generated from. And then if you click out of this, your teardrop is indexed on the site as one of these squares. So essentially, the more as the site is engaged with and people offer their tiers, they build up on this site, and you can kind of click on any of these and look on any of the kind of tiers that were offered and the expressions that were generated to go along with it. So that's the just kind of practical walkthrough of the project. And yeah, I'll let Julia kind of guide us into how we want to unpack it.
I want to hear more about how you started thinking about this work, and what ideas and experiences informed this project. I mean, for me, when I first sort of saw this, I was struck by a couple of things. One, it felt very relevant, very topical. I mean, I think over the last 2 years, there has been so much personal and collective grief that we've all experienced in different ways. And at the same time, we haven't really had the usual spaces for collective grieving that we might have been used to, right? So people were holding funerals on Zoom, for instance, right? And even the way that this website is kind of laid out with this kind of square grid, to me feels like evocative of this kind of the square grid that is like our new reality. This is now the space where we are able to process these kinds of traumas and emotions. So that was my kind of initial sort of visceral reaction to the piece. But I was really curious about like what you were thinking about when you started making this.
Yeah, I mean a lot of things, and this work kind of happened by accident, but it's also because, yeah, I mean, myself, like many others, tears and crying were very much a part of my reality. And so it started to leak into ongoing research I was already doing. And I was developing a work that was looking at religion and artificial intelligence. And I was really taken by this church that had been created in California, maybe in 2017, by an ex-Google employee. And the church was called The Way of the Future, and it was based upon a coming AI God. And one of the principles of this religion was that the AI God would find a way to become intelligent beyond biology. So kind of one of the key tenets of the church was intelligence that transcends biology. And I think you could look at this AI church in Silicon Valley and think this is like a wacky kind of one-off. But I think when I look at that church, I see it as part of a kind of long history in California of fringe religions, cult activity, new age spirituality that has always been deeply embedded with Silicon Valley and the tech industry, and how technologies are often kind of imagined, conceptualized. It's certainly kind of part of the ecology and environment there. So it just really jumped out at me and stayed with me, just because it became like, one of these things that kind of pops up that catches your attention, but actually underneath it is like a much deeper, vaster history to think about. So some things I was thinking about with kind of religious fantasies of artificial intelligence had to do around judgment, immortality. But as I was kind of moving around my research between religion and artificial intelligence, I kept bumping into material on crying and tears. Whether that would be when I was reading about AI, emotion recognition, and kind of newer studies and versions of emotion recognition coming out that can detect like babies crying, for instance. But then in religion, reading about different religions, I would always come up against this idea of crying as a pious, devout activity that was a form of a kind of a language. Crying as a language that could communicate with God, as a kind of perfect language of communicating with God. And because I was already thinking about this relationship of religion and AI, the crying just started coming closer and closer together. And I think my approach to this was that I wanted to try and tell or create a kind of speculative story. I guess this project is almost kind of like an interactive speculative story that kind of imagines a kind of fantastical teleological endpoint to emotion recognition, which is kind of a God figuring out actually how to extract emotion through teardrops. And of course, what really interested me with tears, especially with all of the previous work around biometrics, was that tears, emotional crying, which is a particular type of crying. There are different types. There are 3 different types of crying. Emotional crying is one of them. Is this idea that what you're feeling in the depths, like inside yourself, becomes externalized. And again, thinking how I talked about earlier with biometrics needing that kind of externalization, something on the surface in order to make a reading. It just seemed this really interesting mashup of thinking about tears as a kind of perfect way of communicating with God, and then thinking about tears already kind of entering technically into the terrain of emotion recognition. So I think this work is just, like a lot of the works, it's about bringing together some things that might not seem like they actually relate, but there's a lot of historical entanglement. And I think the fantasy drive behind a lot of artificial intelligence, which really is ultimately toward things like radical bodily transcendence, figuring out how to extend life, achieving a way to automate judgment against masses of people. These are incredibly religious principles. So the work is just, I think, exploring that through kind of speculative lens. And the other thing I can say about crying was I thought about, wanted to create a work where there was a God a God character that was practically experimenting with understanding crying and what that could mean. And for the God to be able to do that, it would require, visual input, sonic input, and textual input. So kind of technically, this God figure is kind of studying those different types of informatic patterns to try and figure out what crying could be. So it's like the work doesn't resolve that. But then there was this other, maybe broader interest in crying and grief, or not even just grief, just thinking about what is a broader socio-political relationship of tears and emotions with the industry of AI. So on the one hand, I start to think about, all these different forms of judgment, this phrase of kind of automating different forms of inequality and the kind of pain or grief, torment that can cause, whether that's, losing your job from, kind of a system, getting automated out, whether that's connected to predictive policing. And then on the other hand, thinking about, kind of like tears of joy. I guess also, having these 6 emotions to work with really started kind of activating my thinking along them. So in emotion recognition, you have anger, disgust, sadness, surprise, joy. I always forget one.
Did you say fear? I don't think you said fear.
Fear. Thank you. Fear.
Yeah.
Yes. So just kind of started thinking about crying along all those axes. And with the research that I've done around kind of different Silicon Valley elites, kind of thinking, I start to imagine these tears of joy as the singularity, this event where artificial intelligence surpasses humanity, and the fantasy of downloading consciousness into different types of machines. I feel like, anyway, I can see that as like a kind of tears of joy moment. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different axes that kind of crying and tears are working on through this work. And it's just trying to hold them together, I guess, in a technical and kind of poetic way.
I mean, I think what's interesting too is like, emotions are classically things that machines are incapable of. Like you think of, Spock on Star Trek, he's like always just fascinated by human emotions. It's something that he can't understand. It's incomputable, right? And with something like emotional intelligence, with affective computing, which this work is dealing with, it attempts to create a standardized way of understanding human emotion across culture too, which is also, I think, a very tall order. And even with something like a single form of emotional expression like crying, right, where this kind of internal state becomes outwardly manifest, it's still an unreliable link to any one particular emotion, right? So you can cry, as you were saying, out of let's say fear, laughter, I don't know, anger, surprise. Like it can be linked to so many different emotional states. I guess what I'm getting at is like, with the extraction of tears by this fictional AI god, it kind of speaks to me, at least, to this form of training that we all kind of participate in as we interact with these technological systems. And emotion and our kind of psyches as being, in many cases, described as like, if not the next frontier, like the frontier, the technological frontier that we're kind of currently in right now. So, the Facebook algorithm is no longer trying to predict your shopping choices. It's actually trying to predict your emotional state. And that's what is being the technical problem that's being solved right now, and that we're helping to solve by participating in these systems. So I think this project, go ahead, yeah. Sorry.
No. So that's a great point. I like that, because yeah, that's an element of this for sure, is about training, kind of participating in that training and reframing the training, through a certain kind of religious experience.
And one thing that I think is really fantastic about your work is the way that you kind of weave together these really elaborate worlds with these kind of origin myths like you have here. You also had one for Sanctum. They are very kind of robust counter narratives or story worlds that are often using, real events, real developments, and commenting on them, but in a way that, takes you into this fantastical space. And so I'm curious about like what appeals to you about this as an artistic strategy, because it's one that I think unites a lot of your practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's changed over the years a lot, and I think I was, as an artist, I was trained more with when I was studying art, I was trained more under kind of 90s tactical media artists. And I think if any of you are familiar with 90s tactical media, that was art that was very much about developing art that kind of exists somewhere between, let's say, a conceptual object and a political tool, but definitely something that could be used very kind of clearly and overtly in some kind of activist gesture, I would say. And you could certainly see that with earlier work that I've made. I didn't share the facial weaponization suite, but this was a project that accompanied face cages that was about developing masks to evade biometric facial recognition detection. And And I think after that work, I it's a part of kind of lost interest in thinking that I could actually come up with solutions to these problems, um, and wanting to make work that is a little bit more ambiguous. And I don't necessarily mean politically ambiguous, but I mean ambiguous about what is happening and what can be done. And I think that's because after I had made work, this earlier work in this vein of a tactical media artist, I felt very stuck for a period of time, that kind of making in that vein wasn't productive, because I think it just felt impossible for me to only make work that proposed some kind of technical fix. And I don't even know if a technical fix is always actually what is needed. Like, it might be some other kind of fix, or maybe fix isn't even the right word, kind of something else. But which kind of led me back to making, or it led me towards making work like this, which I think speaks to my, I was originally trained in filmmaking and film directing, and I do have this interest in the kind of stories and fantasies, and so that's how I ended up where I am. And of course, who's to say? I mean, I'm sure it will change. I'm sure, usually with each work, things are kind of shifting and moving, but this is where I'm at right now. And when I think about the work as it's adding up, I often, even though this work, again, I think about it as more of like a speculative story, I don't really have a kind of clear concept to go along with this work. But often when I make work, I usually do come up with some concept that becomes a kind of discursive frame and a different way of entering what I've been doing. Because when I'm researching something, the artwork is one way in which that research kind of emerges, and I share that. But there's other modes, whether that's writing or lectures, and so I think of it as kind of additive within, kind of a larger body, a broader kind of ongoing investigation, and that will shift as things continue.
Awesome. I'm going to start pulling questions from the Q&A. So if you haven't already posted or upvoted some of the great questions that are in there, head over to Slido to do that. Let's start with this one, which a couple of people have upvoted. I feel like we've touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can speak about it a bit more explicitly. Someone asks, can you talk about the relationship connection between artificial tears and real tears? And I'm also going to add on another one, which is just a very quick one to answer, which is, what is the significance of the title?
Oh yeah, okay. Actually, the question about artificial tears and real tears is a great one. And it's actually one of the first questions. Well, I'm going to interpret it the way that Julia once asked it to me. And I remember Julia was like, Zach, there is a plot hole here. Which was this idea, kind of like mapping this augmented reality, kind of tears, and it not being, like you actually really crying, and the kind of character of this, the kind of character of this somehow like bringing this up with you. And that, of course, I think it's, it's important to acknowledge, like, yes, there's a difference. And I think that's open to, kind of interpretation in the work. And but I guess partially what I was interested in with that setting was thinking about this God character kind of somehow being able to bring things out in you. And I think that connects to these fantasies of what these technologies and machines can do. So let me maybe explain that maybe better with like how your emotion might get detected. So, I've experimented with this, the algorithm we're using a lot. And of course, I didn't think I was particularly expressing an angry face, when my emotion was detected. But I think within the parameter of this kind of speculative story, it reads as this God is somehow able to see some type of emotion in me that I am not able to necessarily maybe like properly express on my face at the time. So I think this kind of interest in like misrecognition, interpreting, and kind of forcing different types of readings and reactions on the face. I'm like interested in that kind of like this this dynamic within the work. And also, I think I'm interested though at the same time of how these kind of augmented reality face filters, which I'm sure some of you are more familiar with these on other, on plenty of social media platforms, right? There's a lot of actually crying filters on Instagram, for instance. And but yeah, I'm kind of interested in like the kind of digital logic of that, and thinking about actually, like, is that kind of culturally creating some type of blend between, artificial and real tears. And I think also, within the story, it's kind of like the only thing this God can do, right? It can't actually force you to really cry, but it can force you to cry augmented reality tears. And yeah, again, I think that's just kind of an opening. And I'm also interested in, like whether you're crying or not, like how that makes you feel. Because when I was developing this work, I did spend a lot of time looking and thinking about and watching people see themselves crying augmented reality tears. And, yeah, I'm really taken by that dynamic. And that's a kind of rambling answer. But, also maybe another thing I'll say is, I'm also interested in, there are actually artificial tears you can also go and buy, right? That are kind of liquid. And I'm working with that in another project that I'm developing right now. So you'll see another version of artificial tears soon in actual liquid form. And then the question about 576 tears. Often what happens with work that I make, because I just end up throwing so much in, something happens that becomes, maybe not fully developed in this work, and then I end up pulling it out and thinking about it more in the next work I make. So one thing that I wanted to kind of plant a seed for with myself in this project is thinking about religious numerology. And kind of, I guess the kind of imaginative numerology here actually began with pop music, because all the different pathways that I spent studying and reading tears led me to, lots of different material, whether that was like Anne Rice's book, Cry to Heaven, or, literally listening to hundreds of songs about crying, because there's just so much music out there about crying. And there was one song in particular that really hit me for a variety of reasons that are kind of, ineffable and also just personal and emotional, was this song by by Question Mark and the Mysterians, which, yeah, probably the name of a band, if they're question marks and the Mysterians, is gonna catch my attention. And they have a kind of a garage rock song from 1960 called 96 Tears. And this song haunted me for a long time. And one day I just multiplied 96 by 6. And that's because I was thinking about these 6 emotions. And I was also thinking about creating a training set for a neural network. And 6 times 96 is a pretty good, robust training set, whether that's a set of images or something else for a neural network. And that's that's how I came up with the number 576. And I think this project, there's kind of a numerology running through it of the number 6, where you have these like 6-word phrases, for instance, as well. And in the next project that I'm making, it's also about religion, that will premiere next year. I think these kind of questions and thinking around numerology and computation and calculation will continue to develop and probably bubble more clearly to the surface.
There's a number of good questions in here. there's a follow-up question, which maybe you can answer really briefly,
Sure.
which is, where did it go? About how when we, oh, sorry. Or maybe it disappeared. Oh, no, it's here. When we are asked to offer our tiers, though, we make the choice to click. Are we offering our tiers towards the point of accelerating the AI gods learning?
Mm. Yes, I mean, I think within the story, the kind of the speculative story of the website, well, I mean, I guess that's what you're told. But I think, what really interests me about religion and these tech and kind of proprietary technologies, which, most of the AI systems that we're able to interact with on a daily basis is that they're black boxed. Kind of religion, right, is similar. With like, right, if you're a believer, then there's kind of certain things that you don't have access to. There's certain things that you don't know. And I think the work is definitely putting those things into some kind of relation. And I think, the work is like, yeah, it's like a religious sci-fi experiment where this God is collecting these tears. But we don't know what the outcome of that will be, even though, of course, the religion, right, there's this tension between most religions are teleological, in the sense that there's some kind of like a point that we're kind of working toward, and whether that's some right transcendence, passing into heaven, the return of a God. And so this God is working towards something, but again, there's the tension between the story and what it claims that it's kind of teleological thing that it's working toward, and then actually what's happening practically and technically.
Yeah,
which is unclear.
Mm-hmm. And we get to make that choice in contrast to what typically happens when we interact with these systems, which is, it's in the terms of service or something, and it's happening in the background without that kind of consent.
I mean, maybe it's also about, I'm interested in thinking about what does it mean to submit to a belief system as opposed to just submitting to a technology when you're not thinking that there's a belief system, kind of put behind it.
Right. That leads me into the next question, which is about how you situate your role as an artist in relation to AI. And I think that's actually especially interesting because the last couple of works that you've made, you're not just making work about AI, you're using AI in the creation of the work, and you're using things like GANs, natural language processing, in emotional intelligence, in this case, like biometric, in the creation of the work. So yeah, I'm curious about where you situate yourself.
That's a great question. I mean, I think honestly, there's a lot of factors that come into how I choose to approach making a work. And I just, maybe it's fair and important to say that I don't necessarily discriminate against making a work that's like purely representational, meaning like if I were just to make a kind of film in a classical sense, or a multi-channel video installation that is, with material that's not necessarily AI generated. But you're right, I have also experimented with AI generated material, and sometimes like this work, there's a mixture of different types of ways of producing material, whether that's, kind of computer graphics or more generated material. And I don't know, I think it's just important to flag that because I don't have a particular kind of technical or formal fetish for one or the other. And the early work that I started making with artificial intelligence, the first works that I made I was way more interested in characters, kind of personas of AI. So I made this work in 2017 with an artist who's based in LA. Her name's Jemima Wyman. And we made this work together called I'm Here to Learn So, that was looking at this Microsoft chatbot, Tay, who was released as like a teenage American female millennial, and maybe some of you are familiar with this. And her machine learning abilities were quickly exploited online. Where she was released on Twitter, and she was quickly turned into like a neo-Nazi, misogynist, homophobe, kind of all the bad things, and was taken offline in a day. And we made a work that looked at different questions around gender and AI with Tay. And then I also made another work that dealt with this character, this AI life companion named Azuma Hikari that's produced by a Japanese company named Gayvox. So I don't know, I'm just kind of flagging that I guess I have a really kind of wide-ranging interest, and it definitely connects to, as an artist, I'm interested in how AI is represented and, you know, kind of interpreted and thought and imagined, you know, which is, I think, definitely why I would lean towards something like religion, you know, to kind of try and think about religious beliefs, influence, or tendencies that are kind of seeping into how something like this might be getting developed by tech corporations. But yeah, it could be, I don't know, the strategies I feel like have really shifted. You know, it could be about suggesting a political alternative in a clear way and a queer way. It could be about suggesting a political alternative in a hazy way where I don't really know how to get there, but the work is like reaching toward that, like trying to kind of reach out and grab that. And then there could be, you know, more work like this that is, you know, maybe a bit darker, that's kind of staying in a place of horror. Even I have a really strong interest in horror, actually, and I often think horror is a genre that's often disavowed in the arts, but there's something about horror to me that just touches on something really, profound about the times that we're living in. And you know, yeah, and I guess the strategy here with these works is about trying to you know, make that horror felt when it's so easy to overlook when we're engaging with these systems. And then, of course, I guess with this work, you know, there's also questions around kind of extraction and, you know, thinking about the extraction of data, the extraction of energy, the extraction of kind of life force that AI as an industry kind of requires to even run and operate. Anyway, that's a rambling answer. I'm sorry. I guess I just don't really know how to pin it down.
That's okay. I think it was an insightful look into the way that you approach these issues in your practice. But I think we are out of time. So I'm not going to ask another question. Instead, I'm going to turn it back over to Lily to close us out.
Well, thank you both so much for this like super insightful conversation. It was really a pleasure to listen to both of you chat about this work that has been so long in the making. And thank you so much to our audience for participating, for your comments and questions that informed the discussion today. Please do share any further feedback you may have. In the Slido sidebar, you'll see a kind of survey pop up, and we would be really grateful if you could fill that out. We will be uploading a recording of today's event to our project's YouTube channel, which will include captions and also BSL interpretation. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the Arts Council England for generously supporting the event, the work, and This is Public Space, and also to Jack Newberry, our project coordinator, for providing technical support for this evening. I'd also like to thank everyone who worked super tirelessly on this work to make this happen. Studio Pandan, Alex Piacenti, who is also in the audience today, shout out to him for programming this. Marty Samuelson, Ashwin Cruz, Christopher Tiago, Sin, A.S. Sinclair, and Maureen Renner. And of course, Zach, thank you for producing this work and for everything that went into this project. As you said, it was a journey, and I'm absolutely thrilled of how it turned out. So if you haven't already, I encourage you all to go and visit the work and actually experience it for yourself. Jack will post a link in the chat for all of you now. And thank you so much for attending the event this evening.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye. Have a good night.
Good night. Take care. Goodbye.